Hello everyone. Welcome to Blockchain and Internet of Things BiTS seminar series from Trust and Network Lab at DOT. And we have this talk every month, monthly basis, and we have our guest speaker from both academia and industry. And we record this talk and we present. After this presentation, we upload this talk to our Trust and Network Lab website. So today it's a great pleasure to have Davies with us. And David is the CEO of Unity. David has spent over 30 years in technology in senior management roles at global investment banks such as Goldman Sachs, Nomura, and Standard Chartered banks. David has also been the founder and CEO of several successful fintech, SaaS, and mobile startup companies. The work by David and Unity has been globally recognized by IFC World Bank, Mastercard Foundation, UN Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO, and Oxford University. So once again, welcome, David, and the platform is yours.
Awesome, thank you very much. So like I say, hi, I'm David Davies. I'm the founder of Unity. What we do is relatively simple. We take very low-cost smartphones and we transform them into a tool that enables some of the very smallest farmers in the world, smallest low-income farmers in remote regions of developing nations, to improve their income, be able to collaborate and trust with people better, access to a marketplace so they can buy things that are normally not so easy to acquire in their regions, and then also be able to connect to financial services to be able to sell their products better. So all these farmers you see on the screen, they're in a region of Jima in Ethiopia. And we ran a project for a couple of hundred farmers in that region. It's about, I think, our fourth project in Ethiopia. So most of those farmers, before we met them, had never even had a phone before, any phone or any technology. So what Unity does is actually kind of simple. We take phones and instead of like advancing them the way Apple does to make them more feature rich and more complicated, we do the opposite. We make the phone really simple so it does the things that a smallholder farmer in a remote region needs to do in a simple and understandable way. So the first one, it's quite important, is most of the regions we work, there's no connectivity. Or the bigger problem is farmers may have connectivity sometimes, but they don't always have money to update their data plan. And so we redesign the operating system of the phone so it has a message queue in it. So when a farmer does a transaction, they transact phone to phone with QR codes. So when I'm handing over my crop or ordering something, I use a QR code and communicate with the other person's phone. That works when there's no signal. And then those transactions go in a message queue on the phone, and if the farmer gets 1 bar of signal in the middle of the night or he hotspots off a friend's phone, what happens in Jima, Ethiopia quite often is the guy from the cooperative, he comes around and he gives all the farmers a hotspot when he's collecting stuff. So we've got quite a useful ways of letting farmers connect. Another very important thing we do, and you can see this on the phone, but it's on the screen up there, is we change the interface of the phone. Now, it is still a normal phone, so it works like a normal Android phone if you switch on that, but it boots up into our application with big geometric shapes and primary colours. I'm handing over my crop, I press the green pentagon. If I'm getting my payment, I use the blue circle, because most of our farmers have very low literacy. And so we try to make it so they key off symbols and numbers, and then the interface works in a very simple way. It goes one function, one thought per screen. So it's not like we'd do an Uber app. So we'd go to Uber and say, I want to go from here to here, I want this sort of car, and I want it there, and I want it then. And we put all that on the screen. That's very complicated for someone who's never had a phone before. So we do it like, what crop are you handing over? When do you want to hand it over? When is it ready? Like all that's one step at a time, so there's not too much overload, and we find that interface works much better. The most important thing we're really doing is creating trust and cooperation between these groups of farmers. And that's interesting because it's something that's largely been solved in our countries like 100 years ago. I grew up on a wheat farm. We take a wheat truck into a silo, we get a docket of paper, and we don't think anything of that we've handed over $10,000 worth of wheat for a slip of paper. If you did that in most of the country we work, you'd never get paid. And that happens terribly. We've actually, in our first project in Kenya, there was a sugar mill down the road that hadn't paid any of the farmers for 4 years. So they were taking sugarcane, and the farmers had nowhere else to send it, so they were collecting it, but they just weren't paying anyone. And that happens all the time. So there's this real significant problem with trust and cooperation. And the two crops that really is most apparent in is coffee and cocoa, which are two of the biggest crops that are produced predominantly by smallholder farmers. Both of those are about 80% really smallholder farmers in remote areas of developing nations living below the poverty line. Those two crops in particular benefit from cooperation. Cocoa needs to be collected together, fermented and dried, and you get 2.5 to 3 times the value of dry beans from wet beans. And it's a simple process. As soon as one farmer, that's pretty hard to do. But as soon as you get a group of farmers to do it, and they know who's putting the cocoa beans in, they can work it together and they can get a much higher price. But the most important thing that happens with cocoa is we reduce a massive amount of wastage. Because what's happening at the moment is the farmer's got a couple of acres, they'll collect some cocoa beans from the trees, they'll have them in bags, and no one will turn up to collect them because nobody knows they've got them. So they're sort of waiting for someone to turn up. We get this hear this in vanilla all the time as well. And vanilla is a really valuable crop. A lot of that just never gets anywhere because no one turns up, no one knows the farmer's got it. The other problem that happens is the people that are turning up, and this is particularly apparent with vanilla. We've got a project in Papua New Guinea where people used to drive around the forest trails with a truck saying, we'll be back in 3 days, bring your vanilla out, and then they'd come back with an M50 mounted on the truck because they were carrying so much cash that it was seriously dangerous for them and the farmers they were handing it over to. So the other thing we do is we allow the farmers to hand it over. They've got a secure record, it's on their phone, and this is how we use blockchain. Blockchain is a transaction log in our system, it's nothing more. It means that I can hand over to you my cocoa beans, we do a transaction on our phones, it's on both our phones. When either of us gets a signal, that'll get flushed back to the cloud. And then we know that no one can ever say, I didn't hand you 28 kilograms of cocoa beans and you owe me this amount. So that's the most important thing, improving trust. But then the other thing we do, because we've got all farmers on the same platform and because we control the platform, we can push down these applets separately. And I'll get into it a bit later, but this makes it an incredibly powerful platform for doing hackathons and for others to create third-party solutions that we can deploy to a community as a whole. So we've now done this. This slide's a bit old. We've completed 7 projects and we've got 12 in progress. So we're in about 12 countries around the world, and those are just us. Our biggest customer is Fairtrade International, and that I think gets us into another 40 odd countries. So Agunity is being used quite significantly around the world. And as you see, the main crops that we get the great results with is both coffee and cocoa. And we're going to talk about something later that's really exciting that we're doing with cocoa and a digital token. Sorry, with coffee and a digital token. In order to do this, what we do is a very, very diverse, requires a very, very diverse skill set. We've got team members that come from serious banking technology. We've got people with experience in blockchain. We've got people that have done multi-$100 million agricultural projects. We have a lot of people that come from NGO backgrounds where they've worked in the deployment services, because there's no good building a platform like this and then just dropping it in the hands of farmers with no training. So we need people that go out into the field. Navitra is the star of that team, that goes out in the field, sits down with farmers and does these workshops to teach the first group how it works. What is so wonderful about our system is every time we do that, that first group understands what they're doing, they train the next group. So when we're creating that first group, we're creating super users, or ag champions as we call them. And we've had situations where other villagers have walked through the night to come and tell us that they want to be next on the program. And what usually happens is people from the first village will then become part of the training team. So it's absolutely essential you train really well firstly, and have that ability, but then what we concentrate on is making so the system will spread organically across a community. And then in total, we have a team of 50 people in 19 countries now. And one of the things I'm really happy about that we learned to do during COVID was hire people locally in country rather than flying people all around the world. And we found that we get really, once we learned how to do that, it's not easy to source and train and deal with people remotely somewhere like New Guinea. But once you learn how to do it and get them onto a proper program, it's actually much cheaper and works very well. Now, Unity is a funny business in that our users are the farmers, but the farmers are not really our customers. We're like a connection bridge between a lot of very good organisations, the likes of Fairtrade, other commodity buyers, a lot of banks and financial institutions, and a lot of NGOs who want to, also product and service providers. Now, what all they have in common is those organisations want to reach these very last mile communities, but at the moment they can't do it very efficiently. So the commodity buyers like Fairtrade, they take 18 months to get data from the field to report it in their annual reports. World Food Programme, who we work with quite a lot, has got a similar sort of problem. They're like doing deployment projects when they don't really know whether that means the kids are eating better or there's more food getting into region or who's food short. We have survey technology on the application that we can, the person's getting their normal income from the coffee, we can give them a little bit of a bonus if they tell World Food Programme whether they're getting enough food at the moment and they fill in a survey. People will do that religiously for a few extra cents on their trade. So we can collect all sorts of information from the field that are normally not available. Now, what's very important about this is according to FAO, there's about 570 million farmers in the world, but only 70 million of those are farmers that any of us would really recognise. The majority of farmers in the world have a couple of acres of land, they live on a couple of dollars a day, and they're usually in an area so remote that it's very, very difficult for anyone to deploy any technology or support them in any way. These are not people that they have no connectivity at the moment, so they can't look at an ad online. They've got no way to know about anyone else's solution. They usually don't have bank accounts, so they can't pay for things. So they're like essentially the worst customers in the world for any sort of normal business. And that's why all the companies tend to, and Farm Force is a great example of this, a really good organisational system. And they'll talk about the fact that they work with smallholder farmers. What they mean is 10-acre farmers. And what we see quite often is they'll deploy to the bigger farmers. What happens to the really small-scale farmers in that situation? The bigger farmer has got Farm Force or some other management system. They can get a contract with a supplier because the supplier likes them to be organised. They know when they've got coffee, what they can hand over, they can receipt it and stuff. Makes management systems make life much better for the people buying commodity or supporting those farmers. But what happens in those communities is that farmer's then got a contract. They start buying off all the small farmers, probably at a lower price than those farmers were getting already, and you've created a have or have not. So one of the most critical things that Unity tries to do is make sure that we don't leave anyone behind. We make a system that works when there's no connectivity, doesn't need literacy, and it doesn't need the person to be familiar with technology or anything else. So that means that we're picking up these 500 million farmers that are have some facilities but really not capable of using a full management system, and the ones that have never had anything, which is about 500 million. So we're targeting that bottom of the pyramid to make sure that everyone gets a fair go at selling their cocoa beans or their coffee for the same price anyone else is. The other really interesting thing that this does is levels the playing field on gender and racial and cultural basis. So you see situations, and Ethiopia is another good example of this, where a certain demographic group will be getting a lower price just because the buyers are of a particular race. And women in particular will often be getting a very different price than men under other systems, because in certain cultures they can't be seen as negotiating. Ghana and Ivory Coast is a complete exception to that one. Kind of works in the reverse there. So what is a challenge is also an advantage. So in order to make our system operate, we had to sort of rethink the way you run a business in this market. We are a commercial entity, and so we need to make money, and we firmly believe that if you want to be successful at a large scale, you need to be a viable business, because that's how you get investment, that's how people support you, and that's how you grow. So we've restructured the way we work in order to fit with the needs of this particular demographic and access a market that most others aren't really interested in. And so what we do is we usually start off a project like we did in Ethiopia, where the first couple of hundred farmers get a phone to try out for a year. We started in Kenya using about $20, like very interestingly, you get something about equivalent of an iPhone 5 nowadays in bulk at about 20 something US dollars. We started with those ones in Kenya, and then as we ran more and more projects, we found out the farmers actually wanted something slightly better. These ones are quite interesting. That's a military grade, fully water resistant phone, and I give it to my daughter who hasn't managed to destroy one yet, so she's the greatest tester of phones there is. So what we do is we give the farmers a trial of the phone. In Ethiopia, like, the only guy that didn't want to keep his phone after the year was one guy who was leaving the area. So we normally get about 100%. In fact, you'd normally have to pry the phone out of their hand to get it back off them. So we give the first group of farmers a trial, then we give them a payment plan. We talk to them about what they feel comfortable paying back on the phone, and it usually means they'll pay it back over 2 to 3 years, but they also pay the onboarding and training cost. Now, why that works really well is before we go into the market, we always survey the farmers, and typically they'll look at that phone and they'll assess it in their local market, and they'll come up to about $200. And so the phone ends up costing them about 70 landed in bulk, and we charge them some onboarding costs. So for as far as they're concerned, they're getting the best deal ever on a really good phone. And that really, we don't make any money out of that. That's just us to get phones in bulk to farmers, and this allows us to be scalable. Then we get a little subscription, usually collected from the cooperative. And then mostly our business, like our company is really like eBay. We just do a lot of other stuff to make that possible. So really the way we make money is when farmers buy solar kits or fertilizers or farm tools, or connect to a bank and start putting money into a banking service, or get an insurance. All the things that they wouldn't normally be able to do, and the only way they're able to do those is we first got them to use the system to hand over their crops and to get paid. And so people, New Guinea was a classic example of this. We surveyed a whole group of farmers. None of them had a bank account. None of them wanted a bank account because you had to go all the way into Booker to use the bank account. It was just not practical to them. As soon as they started got the system, particularly the women farmers, they started to treat the cooperative like a bank account. They'd hand over their cocoa beans, they'd come back to get paid, and they'd say, no, you keep it. I'll just have 10 kina because that's what I want today. I don't want to take the rest of the money home, because if I do, the boys are going to turn up and want to have a party, and it's all going to be gone. So we saw behaviour of people naturally wanting to do banking. Then the next thing is you just talk to a bank and you say, okay, we'll be able to put this into a pension fund or something, and they can move it straight from the cooperative into their bank account. And so that person, particularly a woman who might be vulnerable, has got no risk that anyone's going to get her money. She can put it away into her pension fund or her savings account, or pay from insurance, or pay from school fees. So that's really what our business is about. We do all this other stuff just to get the farmers comfortable with the system, and then our business is really essentially providing them access. And why that eBay model is so compelling, if you go to a village like Timputs, where we were in Bougainville, the farmers there would have to spend about $50 to get into Booker to buy anything. And so just them being able to order a solar kit and have it delivered out to the community has saved them that $50 in the trip. And the one they would have got in Booker was probably sitting in the shop for 2 years anyway. So we can get a new solar kit that's better and cheaper than what they'd buy. It's an absolute bargain for them. The cooperative makes money, which is very important, because at the moment, when we first come into these communities like Kenya, there'd been a cooperative like 3 times and it always just fell apart because it wasn't a viable business. The cooperative now can sell solar kits and fertilisers and it gets it all coordinated. They don't really have to spend the cost because they're really just taking orders from other suppliers that want to sell things to a community they can't normally reach. So that benefits everyone. It makes the cooperative into a viable, stable business. They can make a little bit of money. That means the cooperative becomes stable, and that's so important for the stability of the community. And then the cooperative can use that money to, they usually use it to buy equipment and sheds and other facilities. The company selling the solar kit, this is great because they were never going to sell the solar kit to anyone in Timboots. As much as so many of the solar providers talk about reaching the last mile where the kits are normally used, most of it gets sold in the villages. The other really interesting one, we had a great discussion early on with the Ministry of Finance and Ministry of Telco in Myanmar. This is before when Myanmar was still completely free. The Ministry of Finance had given licenses for microloans. So I'm thinking about a dozen organisations, I forget the exact number. And every time they said, we want you to lend in rural areas because the farmers need to be able to get microloans for desserts. What happened every single time? They found that those organisations were lending microloans in the city and hadn't reached out. Why? Because how do you reach a farm? How do you validate a farmer? How do you know if they've got income, if they're a reliable member? Because most of them haven't got any identity. So we solve all those problems and we make those farmers accessible to microloans and other things. And so when we do something like coca, we typically see, depending on how well it's organised, anything from a doubling to a tripling of the farmer's income in about a season. And mostly that's because you stop lots of green coca going to waste and you change the farmers from, instead of getting the green coca price, they're suddenly getting the dried coca price. And if you get a community doing that together and they're all getting paid, it's one of the interesting things that happens with coffee and cocoa. The person that grows it, the price they get paid normally has got nothing to do to the actual value of the produce. So if a farmer sticks nails in vanilla and breaks the machine, that's adding to the weight of the vanilla. As far as the farmer's concerned, that's a good deal. But as soon as the farmer's got a stake in what happens at the output of that, the farmer starts to be conscientious about the quality of their coffee, their cocoa, the vanilla, and you get much better results through the supply chain. So everyone benefits further on. So what we're doing is we're saying, you hand over your coffee beans into this thing, you might get a little bit of a payment now, and then you get a payment when the cooperative or the seller sells on the coffee. You get paid on the real value of the coffee or the real value of the cocoa. So this causes better quality to come, and so cocoa is really interesting. The Nestle buys at about 1,800 US a tonne, but we've got farmers that get 10,500 a tonne for producing much better quality chocolate that goes to the boutique chocolatiers. And there's actually too much of the low-grade chocolate and too much of the low-grade cocoa and not enough of the good grade. So the more producers produce the good one, the easier it is to sell. It's quite an interesting paradox. So we can solve that inefficiency. We can make sure the farmers get better prices. We can make sure they all collaborate together, which leads that. But there's one thing that we really couldn't, and that's just that these prices the farmers get for some of these major crops, and the ones I'd like to highlight is coffee, cocoa, tea, vanilla, coconut products and spices. Those are all produced by far, over 80% is produced by very smallholder farmers that none of us would ever have an ability to connect to. Those farmers get paid ridiculously small prices, but it didn't always used to be that way. If you go back 30 years ago, like nowadays, when you buy a cup of coffee for about $2.80 world average, the farmer's getting about 7 cents. If you go back 30 years ago, the farmer used to get about 10 to 15% of that cup of coffee. So the price to the farmer has gone down in the last 30 years, and we've all become more accustomed to pay more and more for coffee. And that's because the supply chain is squeezing them. So this is a problem that really, really bothered us. It's just so little gets back because there's such in the supply chain. But that problem exists for the other side of the chain. We've spoken to really big commodity buyers, including some of the ones that are considered not that ethical. And I'm not going to get into some of their practices, but there's a real problem that they have, that if a big company pays more for their commodities, they're not connected to the farmer anyway. So what's going to happen is the middlemen are going to take most of the extra they pay. If you're a really big coffee or chocolate brand, it's very, very difficult to make sure that your supply chain is really being ethical. Very, very hard to do that on scale. Fairtrade does a great job of it, but they only do like 1 or 2% of the world market in these commodities. They're not particularly big, and they go to an inordinate effort to make sure that they're tracing their supply chain. The other sustainable brands don't do half of what Fairtrade does on average. So these big commodity buyers are having a really big problem. How do you pay fair prices? How do you make sure there's no children working in your thing? You've got to actually survey the farmers, and often they don't even know where that coffee bag has come from. And to solve that, we created a digital reward token that we call Aggregate. I love this system. So we've deployed this already to hundreds of farmers in Ethiopia and Papua New Guinea, and they're already receiving the rewards. So with Aggregate, you can buy a token here and you can send it to a farmer in Ethiopia or Papua New Guinea. You buy it for $1, you send it to them, they've got $1 of value. Because they've already got the phone, they're already handing over their crops, they're already getting paid from the cooperative, we can insert a digital token into that system, and the farmers, particularly Papua New Guinea, New Guinea farmers were like, we can get paid in this and we can use it for this, and I can buy it fish. Like all over, like this is just another currency to them, and they were like 100% onto it. Ethiopia, a little bit, they started using it amongst themselves, but they weren't so geared to the idea as the farmers in Madang in Papua New Guinea. They were right onto it. So if you have a look at the site agrewards.com, and I can, well, since we're mostly virtual, I won't see it, but if you go into agrewards.com, you'll see a couple of hundred farmers in Ethiopia. You can buy Aggregate really easy and you can send it to them, but I can also give you a QR code if anyone sends me a note, and that'll give you a couple of Aggregate, and you can pick one of those farmers and give it to. Why this is so important is it means a coffee company can buy some Aggregate, can put a QR code on the bag of, or in the bag of coffee, or put a QR code on your receipt, and the person receiving that can release 40 cents or $1 of Aggregate to the farmer. So that this gives an otherwise unethical company the ability to bypass all the middlemen and make sure real income is getting back to the farmer. And this plays a really important role in lots of other things. So when we talk about the hackathon and other things we can do with the platform, we can use Aggregate in that ecosystem for all sorts of micropayments and to collect payments back. It actually solves a big problem for AgUnity, which is how do we get payments out of a country like Ethiopia. So what we're doing is we've got people giving the coffee farmers Aggregate. The cooperative collects the Aggregate instead of collecting other payments from the farmers. The farmers use it for part paying their solar kits or paying off their phones and things. And whereas the cooperative normally owes us a lot of money, we just tell them to transfer it back in Aggregate, so we don't have to worry about transferring money out of Ethiopia, which is really complicated. Why this is important for the platform is because when you create applets, as we do at hackathons, it means you could create a weather or a farming advice app, and you could collect a few cents per farmer for everyone that uses it, and we can facilitate that system. We can do micropayments right across the platform into places where normally these people can't pay you for something. So this only works because we've got this network of existing farmers that are already got payments coming in and out of the platform, and it's that we are introducing and this is the most important thing to be speaking to here today. We recently ran a hackathon in Kenya, supported by Virginia Tech University. And I'll talk a little bit about how the platform's designed at a technical level. AgUnity is essentially a mobile phone, smartphone application, but you see each one of these icons here is a separate JavaScript-defined applet. They're really easy to write. So we gave one of the phones to each team in a hackathon in Kenya, and we gave them a little stub of a program, and we essentially said, over the weekend, knock yourself out, write some JavaScript. It can use our blockchain, so it can record all the transactions. It can see what the farmers are actually trading. So if you want to do, say, a loan application or an insurance application, you can learn the income of the farmers, you can see their identity, you can actually collect payment, or you can put a debt in the system. The farmer has to approve it, of course, but you can say, okay, if you use my weather app, you need to pay me, 20 aggregate or 1 shilling a month, and we can handle all that within the platform. So all those things that a person might normally need to do to build an application, the framework, the working offline, the connecting to a payment system, we've done them all. They're all there. So all you need to do is say, I'll build a nice interface and I'll send you a message to say, grant this or apply for a loan on behalf of this farmer. We can pass that message on to a bank. The bank can say, yep, this farmer's good, transfer some money into the cooperative or transfer some money to us and we can move it around and the farmer gets a microloan. We can do all sorts of things that would normally be incredibly hard. Why is this so exciting? So firstly, our company actually started at a hackathon purely by chance. We were working on, John and I just we'd sold a company in Singapore and we were working on a quite advanced crypto ledger technology for banking, market data area of banking. And we happened to get invited to a fintech conference in London. I couldn't go, so I sent John, who was the lawyer, across to that. He turned up bags in hand off a flight from China, went on Friday to get his pass and goes, there's a hackathon on the weekend. So he calls me up and he says, hey, David, there's this hackathon and it's fintech for good and there's a prize by Singularity University. And I know you've always been a fan of them. We've got to come up with something really big. And so we literally created Ag Unity in order to win a prize at a hackathon. We were not thinking about it as a business. Over the course of that weekend, we were in conversation with a cooperative in South Africa and another one in India, and they were giving us really, really good feedback on this and saying, hey, this should be done. And then we won the prize, but we had Costa Peric, who runs financial services to the poor for Gates Foundation, like Beeline John, and he said, look, we see this problem all over the world. You've just nailed it. Really want you to take it seriously. Come to Gates Foundation if you want help. And 6 years later, we might finally get our first grant out of Gates Foundation. They're not as easy to get funding from as other organisations. But we realised we'd actually done something that we'd come up with an idea that was compelling to them. And then when we circulated it to other contacts in the development bank industry, like Asia Development Bank and IFC, they were like, yeah, this needs it. Like, you need to have farmers on the same platform so we can see what they're doing, so we can support our programs. We had the same result from World Food Programme and the commodity buyers. So we discovered this by accident. And so because that's our roots, we wanted to do something that said, look, if you've got a good idea, it's so difficult to make a startup company in a developed market nowadays. It's so competitive, like whatever market you're in, there's probably a multiple other things. You go to Ethiopia, there is not those, particularly our group of farmers. They have no applications. Literally anything you think of in this developed market could be a valuable solution to these farmers. And so what we created is you can take a JavaScript applet, you can customize it a bit, we can give you the whole background, and within a weekend you could potentially build something like our Kenya teams did, and we could deploy it the next week into 1,000 farmers in Ethiopia and give you revenue back from that without you really having to do anything that you'd normally have to do to release an app. So we're hoping this becomes the framework for people all over the world to be building apps and deploying it in. The other thing we can do is deploy it into locations that you might not even have thought of before. So you build one good health advice app and we can deploy it in Ecuador 1 minute, in Ethiopia, in Kenya, and then in Papua New Guinea all at the same time. So we give you access to a whole market. Kind of what Apple does, but from the opposite market sense of the world. And so that's what we're hoping to do as a future program here. A duplicate of what we did in Kenya, and we're looking to be doing that all over the world in future. So why I think this is interesting is those 500 million farmers support an ecosystem of about 3.1 billion people, which is the majority of people, vast majority of people that live in poverty around the world. And they are largely unaddressed for any sort of commercial applications because we know this personally, they're really, really hard to service because they live in remote areas, they have literacy problems, they don't have phones, they don't have connectivity. We can give people a way to access that. Those people, while they are individually very small, living on a couple of dollars a day, as a market, it's huge. It's the biggest unaddressed market in the world. They currently produce $2.1 trillion of commodities a year that we buy. That's not the vegetables and fish that they sell amongst themselves. That's the cocoa and coffee and things that come into developed markets. They buy $1 trillion worth of products like solar kits and fertilizers. But when you go to those communities, you'd realize that they'd probably buy a whole lot more if they just had access to things. One of the most tragic things I see is when you go to a community in Papua New Guinea and people sell their cocoa for the first time and they get $100 and they go to the local shop. You can literally buy noodles, soap, and alcohol. So where does that money go? Okay. A lot of the problems they have in these communities is lack of access to products that they would really want to buy. And let's face it, if you take the $100 home, it's only going to get used on alcohol a week later, right? So you've got to be the farmer, when they have the income, has got to be say, I want to order this, I want to move it to this account. That's so important. So what we're trying to do is create a whole ecosystem of options for these farmers. There's $200 billion of foreign aid going to these farmers at the moment, and that can be done so much more effectively. And part of the problem that World Food Programme and Asia Development Bank and Africa Development Bank is, how do you deploy that income in the most effective way to those communities? And so there's a whole lot of other apps that people can say, I need a food parcel. I need better education for my kids. And then the aid organisations can deploy that money much, much more effectively. We haven't even touched on the carbon credits. One of the most interesting things we're working on, and iSchool, my colleague here, has initiated that, is we've got a coffee company in Victoria that we'll be working on, that we'll be working with, that buys coffee out of Timor-Leste. And they've been running a wonderful program for 5 years, encouraging those farmers to grow trees for carbon credits. And we ran the numbers. Our Ethiopian coffee farmers would actually make more money on carbon credits than they do growing coffee. There's an incredible market. Certified carbon credits are really valuable now. The problem is you don't get paid for about 3 years. We can create a system where essentially you send the farmers little bits of aggregate which they can use while they're growing the trees. We put IoT nails in the trees so you can identify it's the same tree and it hasn't been cut down. And as the farmer nurtures the tree to the point where they can actually sell a carbon credit, you pay them along the way and then you cash it out in the reverse. So there's a really interesting carbon credit trading. And in our steering commission team, we've got a expert in carbon credit trading there. So we're looking to roll that out in other markets. And again, for a university, we're looking for people to come up with other ideas like that. There's got to be so many other ways you can use a micropayment system to get farmers to do other things. And then it also is about $1.5 trillion worth of this is from another area of World Bank. They're an untapped market for about $1.5 trillion worth of financial services. Most of these farmers don't have insurance, don't have pensions or saving funds. They get remittances from overseas that they lose massive amounts on. We can do that directly through the aggregate payment system, and it's going into the same wallet that they're using. Sorry, actually, I forgot something on the last page. We've just sealed a deal, and I won't announce them yet because we'll spoil their thunder, but one of the big coffee companies in Australia will be doing a trial in the next month, probably in the next 2 months, about July, where when you go into their coffee shops, and this is a brand that everyone knows, when you go into their coffee shops, you'll get a card when you buy their coffee of the month, and it will link to one of our farmers in Papua New Guinea, and you will get to release a reward to that farmer, which I just think is a beautiful thing. That you go into coffee, you have your coffee in the morning, and you get told the farmer that grew, and you get to choose one of the farmers that grew that batch of coffee to release 40 cents to them. And hopefully we'll be doing that at a much larger scale with much larger coffee companies internationally in the future. So essentially our system has benefits all. I mean, as I said, we feel it's important for us to be a for-profit venture so we can raise capital and scale this. It goes back to our origins. One of the things that Singularity University often says is don't do something for 1 million people if you can do it for 1 billion people. And I think one of the challenges with philanthropic things is people don't think about how do you get it to the whole world. So we want Ag Unity to be viable so we can scale this to massive scale and ultimately reach tens of millions of users. We provide great benefits to the commodity buyers because if you're buying coffee, interesting statistics. We won a prize a couple of years back from an insurance company in Japan, and they were meant to sponsor a project, but they couldn't figure out what to do. And eventually we realised that they insure the coffee shipments coming into Japan. And depending on the time of year, 5 to 10% of the coffee in Japan gets thrown out because of spoilage in the bag. A bag of coffee is $200 landed. It's like quite expensive. So they're paying millions of dollars in insurance payouts on this coffee. A problem that can be solved just by tracing back to the origin and finding out who's creating the bags that are a bit too wet and stopping it. So there's an incredible opportunity for commodity buyers just to shore up their supply chain, get more reliable, encourage farmers to grow better coffee or grow. One of the things we're doing in Ethiopia is developing an application. This is another great idea for a hackathon, where the farmer takes a photo of the tree and it shows them which coffee beans to pick. Because again, developing world, if everyone's seen coffee, there's lots of cherries on a coffee bush and you pick the red ones. And if you only pick the red ones and you come back a week later, there'll be more red ones. But what happens to developing world farmers? Typically, I want all the money I can. So they're picking almost every cherry off the thing. Then they bring it into the washing station and the washing station throws out a third to half of the coffee beans they picked. As soon as you give the farmers like a little bit of advice what to do, only pick the red ones, come back a week later, you've automatically saved the farmer like a third of their income just by giving a little bit of training. But most importantly, you've improved the grade of coffee that the commodity buyers got. So the commodity buyers got a really big interest in doing this. Again, product and service vendors. Anybody selling a product or a service to these remote farmers typically can't reach them, can't get paid. And we open a channel to a market that doesn't exist anymore. Second most importantly is retail consumers. What we want to do is facilitate a world where if you're buying coffee or chocolate, you can actually see the origin and you can see that those farmers got treated fairly, and if necessary, you can send some money to the farmers so that you're not contributing to a system of oppression that is getting worse and worse all over the time. And all that literally takes is you to either pick a good product or know where the farmer is and release a little bit of AgRed or something to the farmer. And then most importantly, AgUnity's real role is to enable millions of farmers to lift themselves out of poverty. That's the way we like to phrase it, because what we see ourselves as just giving them some tools, and it's up to them then to improve their income and make better for themselves. And we think that's a much better way of positioning it. So thank you very much. I think we're coming to, I timed that just right. So we can go over to questions now. Yeah.
Paying for sugarcane, delivering sugarcane, not getting paid for 4 years. So how do they ultimately get paid?
Yeah, you still need the cooperative to pay them. So this is an interesting. I was actually 3 years ago. I was trying to get Oxford University to study this exact point. One of the interesting things that we noticed that happens once things are recorded, the whole community seems to act fairly. And we saw this anecdotally on things that we weren't even recording. Like other transactions that they were doing amongst themselves, the community had like stopped trying to one-up each other because certain things are recorded. So they still get paid via the cooperative. So I'm taking my cocoa beans into the cooperative and you're going to ferment them and dry them. You might pay me something when I hand it over. That's half the time that happens. But mostly you're going to ferment it and dry it, sell it, and then I'll get a notice on the application saying that, my 500 kina is ready to collect from the cooperative. And if I do, I go in, I sort of do a reverse. I show you a QR code. It says, yep, you're owed 500 kina. How much do you want to take out? So I start treating the cooperative like a bank. Technically, AgUnity is an accounting system. We're not doing really the transaction on the blockchain, or the aggregate part does, because that enables us to send money from overseas into a country. That's one of the things we had to fix using a cryptocurrency. It's a token. Very importantly, we spent an inordinate amount of legal fees on this to steer clear of any regulation around the token. So aggregate is a non-cash payment token. So it's classified like a frequent flyer mile or a game token, and it has to exist in a closed loop payment system. So while the wallets and everything stay on our platform and the token is used for giving digital rewards, it's in the safe spot as far as regulation. Like we've looked in detail at the FAT, or our lawyers looked in detail at the FATF and the current SEC guidance, and we're in a safe spot regarding that. They're cracking down on, DeFi solutions and. Sorry. Yeah, we have to, we determine again, similar to frequent flyer programs do, we can revalue it, but we revalue it within the system. So you've got to be careful not to say it's a stable coin, because stable coins are part of the focus of the FATF regulation. But at the moment, one aggregate is 1 US cent. If there's a squeeze on the supply, we may cause aggregate we may allow aggregate to appreciate, but we will fix that. So we control the on and off ramps of the platform. It's not a true open cryptocurrency, and for the reason that that's a bit of a regulatory nightmare at the moment. And we have a higher standard that we have to hold ourselves to, because the first thing they do is they start saving the aggregate. And now farmers have got aggregate, and if something happened and Ethiopia, for example, says you can't use that anymore, then we've done a horrible disservice to those farmers that we'd have to fix. So we needed to make sure we're in a particularly safe space. So we didn't go for a fully open transferable token, and we're not going to exchange list and things like that.
Thank you, David. Any other questions? Gauri?
Thanks for the presentation, David. My question is around the involvement of middlemen, because you mentioned that there are middlemen who end up taking chunk of the money, and that are not necessarily benefiting the farmers, especially with the coffee supply chain. You were showing how different parties are taking a huge cut. And given that you are using blockchain to sort of track the supply chain, it would be beneficial if middlemen are also part of this platform, and their transactions and their share is also visible to other stakeholders. Then there is more benefit, and also there's more transparency to the whole supply chain. So do you already have those middlemen part of the blockchain, and how difficult is it to convince these people to be part of this blockchain-based supply chain?
Yeah, look, it's actually a very complicated question, because we work across a lot of commodities in a lot of different countries, and so it's a kind of works different way in different places. But in a lot of cases, what you've got to realise is at the heart of it, we're creating more value. We're creating more produce that gets to produced. So while the middlemen their opportunity has changed, there's more value actually being transferred. So in a lot of cases, it means more for the middleman. It also can mean that the middlemen change their role a little bit. So in Kenya, when we did wheat farmers, right? Previously, what used to happen is they couldn't get it seeded because they're running a couple of acres. No one would run a tractor and seeder across their field, so they'd do it in the most antiquated ways. The combine harvester guys would sometimes come and harvest it, but they were ripping off the farmers because it was horribly inefficient for the combine harvester guy. So essentially the only way they could make money from harvesting a poorly planted field of wheat was to rip off the farmer. Suddenly we've got 100 farmers that have all planted more or less at the same time. We've got them coordinated, and they've planted their fields properly. So they've got a good yield on the crop, and we can get a combine harvester in, and he'll come and do 10 farms all at once and take it straight to the mill. Now, he might still be cheating the system a little bit. They've got their ways. But he was doing a whole lot more. He was making more money, and he essentially became like a contract harvester guy across 10 farms. So he got a much better deal. The farmers got their wheat harvested properly. The farmers could then essentially take it by combine straight to the mill. So they cut out another middleman who really wasn't doing anything productive. So what we've done is change the dynamic. So what we try to do is get the farmers all organised and sorted, and that then creates new opportunities. And one of the things you'll find in Africa is particularly apparent in this is people are so resourceful. If there's more opportunity there, people who used to like rent equipment will find another way to rent equipment because they'll just adapt to the opportunity. And what we're trying to do is create an efficient-based system which makes more opportunity for everyone. So instead of selling equipment, they might be renting it to the farmers or selling them something else. And so mostly it works really, really well. Sierra Leone has got a really complicated coca process where farmer hands it over to a guy, or farmer hands it, gets it fermented, dried, it then goes from a transport guy to a grading centre. The grading centre grades it and then takes it to someone else. And that transport guy was now acting like a transport subcontractor, whereas before they were actually taking the risk of having to own the coca. So there's some very interesting dynamics that we don't fix. We just let the farmers like figure out where the opportunity is. And again, developing markets, they are so good at seizing opportunities. And then sometimes people are making money when they shouldn't be by exploiting others. And those are the ones we really want to crack down on. So like those ones, I hope they do go away because they don't contribute anything to society. Cool.
Thank you, Gauri. Thank you very much, David. Yeah.
More question? I'm just checking if there's anyone in the audience who would like to ask a question, please press the raised hand button. I think we can put you on speaker. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, thanks, David. So I hate to rain on your parade because it's a good parade.
No worries.
How many farmers do you have total right now?
17,000.
Okay. And I've been enough in the real world that I know how this works. When something like this works, right, when it takes off, the next thing you know, the head man with the AK-47 shows up and says, hey, you give me your phone and I'll mediate your transactions for you. Have you had problems with this? I mean, this is a classic re-intermediation problem, right? In this kind of world.
Yeah, we haven't experienced that yet, and we're going into some countries where that will be. Well, we've got a couple of like moonshot projects that we're looking at the moment in markets where that will be an issue. But what we're essentially doing is creating transparency back at the farmer level. So I don't think we make that situation worse, because every farmer has their phone. That person with the AK-47 has to like come and get everyone's phones and reorganize them. It's a much more onerous problem you're putting on the person that wants to rip off that community. And again, we can't solve everything. So we try to make the situation better and more difficult to corrupt, but you can't eliminate corruption from these systems ever. And no one organisation should be so ambitious as to think to do that. But we certainly can make it more transparent. And one of the countries we're talking to about a national program, and this is one of the 10 biggest countries population in the world, that country is looking at doing this from a national, like Ministry of Agriculture point of view, so that they know what the farmers are growing, and then the Ministry of Agriculture and the Finance Ministry can actually intervene if they think there's funny business. Whether that'll work, I'm not sure about, but it's a very grand objective from them, because they certainly want to have happier smallholder farmers, because that's a lot more votes than the intermediate people that are ripping them off. So there's a big interest in governments to sort of make sure you're looking after your most marginalised community. Yeah, no, I understand the problem. It's also a bit like the last question, that it varies country to country and situation. You have much more unwieldy countries. Certainly in Papua New Guinea, which we've got 6 projects now, we've more or less eliminated that sort of bandit problem just by the transparency and the fact that people can earn the money from their coffee beans or coca or whatever and just say, I'll leave it in the cooperative, or I'll have the cooperative transfer into bank accounts. So as soon as you take cash out of the system, it's much more difficult for that person to come and raid the vanilla truck and things like that.
And sorry, just on a related note, I've got like 300 questions, and I'm not gonna try to ask 298 of them.
We can catch them all later.
How do you train a semi-literate farmer? How do you get the phone in their hands, and how do you train them to use it?
Yeah, that's Navitra's job. She's wonderful at that. So Navitra and her team have been working in NGOs for many, many years, Asia Development Bank, USAID, sub projects. And so she's very experienced in that. And I've actually got good videos of it that I can share with you. They're on our YouTube channel. She gets like this big butcher's map of like the farm, and she's got little, like it's all done very manually. We don't let them touch the phone. We say, you now move your cocoa beans to this person. This person's going to receipt, and then we introduce the farm. So she's got a really elaborate training program. And the important thing is just to get everybody comfortable with that program. There's an interesting thing that always happens though. As soon as, and I've been there when it's happened, like as soon as you go into a room, you'll have like 100 people in the room, and you'll have very, very different personalities in that. You'll start to show them what's going, and a lot of people will be, okay, this is really simple, I can get it, it's comfortable. Then you'll have people who, if they were born in another country, they'd be a doctor or hopefully not a lawyer, but something else. They would have done really well because they're like bright people, but just through unfortunate, they've grown up in a village, they never hopped an opportunity to get out. You see them like sitting forward and they're like first up with a question. Those are the people who become champions, and it's not for any motivation. They just have always wanted this opportunity to excel within their peers. And so they'll pick up everything, they'll help other people, they'll tell other villagers, they'll want to go to their village to help them, and they essentially become de facto members of our team. And sometimes we actually do hire those people. But there's an interest, and this is what I was saying about the Oxford experiment. There's two things that I'd love a university to study from a social science point of view. One is how just that little bit of technology changes the interaction amongst the community, how you get these, how you've created opportunities for certain people to support others in their community like they've always wanted to do. And then also how it affects the trust that things that aren't even being monitored are often, people just become fundamentally honest. As soon as you track their cocoa beans, everything else they stop haggling about. It's quite remarkable. So I think those two are really interesting social experiments. Not our job, but I'd love to see universities go in and look at those, because it has really profound implications that if once you get this out at large scale, you're actually changing other behaviours across a wider community that are very, very positive.
We also try and partner with organisations that have a similar ethos to us in country. Ag Unity is a technology platform, and we can't be everywhere, and nor do we want to be driving our own teams. What we want is collaborative opportunities. So whether it's with universities, NGOs, people that are returning home having studied abroad and want to do things in community, uplifting smallholder farmers is not just our personal mission. There's a whole bunch of people that want to do that. So they latch on to Ag Unity as a way of driving what they want to achieve.
Yeah, we're an accelerant for all the other programs, and just simple things like if it's an ag development program, just knowing who the farmers are and what they are and where their region is hugely helpful for them. But like I say, we've got a whole survey module where we can say, we can encourage the farmers to give, and you can give that to something like, what's the one in Pacific that works? Strongham Business, really, really good at helping like communities of smallholder farmers organise and use better ag practices and things, and we just give them great information. We give organisations like that great information so they can do their job better.
Everyone for the questions, and I think we can discuss further offline. So thank you once again, David, for your interesting and wonderful talk. And I would like to say, Gauri, if you could please token of appreciation from Trusted Network Lab at QUT.
Oh, thank you. That's so wonderful.